All right. Thanks, everyone, for coming to MenderCon Keynote. Today, I'm going to talk about, making things better than new. So it's probably no secret to anyone who's attending that I love being a mender. Talking about something that needs to be improved and leaving it better than it was is one of my favorite things to do. And I always like it when I'm watching a TV show or a movie or reading a book, and I come across characters in fiction who also have this attitude, or they appear to be a mender. And there's there's such a character in the movie Airplanes, Fire and Rescue, which my son, when he was younger, watched on repeat, and so I got really familiar with this movie. But one of the characters is an obvious mender. They're the one who is always doing all of the repairs, and they have this catchphrase that just gets used repeatedly throughout the movie. And anytime somebody asks, like, "Oh, is it new? Did I get something new?" The character will reply, "No, it's better than new, because they repaired it. They breathed new life into it, and they made it better than it was." And that's something that I love doing as well. I love taking things that existed in one state and just making them way better than they were before. So today we're going to go through a story of probably one of the most challenging mending projects that I've ever worked on. This is something I did several years ago, back 2004. But I took on a home renovation project, and the reason, part of why I want to tell you about this story is kind of drawing on inspiration from the keynote I gave last year, where I talked about just how much inspiration I draw from the world around me, the things that are built that I as a human being interact with, the building that I work in, the house that I live in, the street that I walk on, this environment that is built up around us that we interact with, is a source of a lot of inspiration for me as a mender, and especially with how I engage with software and how I work on software projects. And so as I go through this story, I'd like for you to reflect on the software projects that you've been involved with in the past, and how some of the challenges that I'm talking about, or some of the experiences that I'm talking about, might be similar to what you've experienced on your software projects. So the house we're talking about was my first house, the first house that I ever bought. This is back in 2005. I lived in Roanoke, Virginia. The house that I bought was built in the 1920s. It was old. It was a little bit run down. It needed a lot of love. But when I looked at it, I just saw so much potential. I would walk, I remember walking from room to room and just thinking about like what this room could look like just how beautiful it would be, once it was brought back to life. And I remember shortly after buying the house, I was all excited and brought a friend of mine over and gave him a tour. And he sat me down and he said, "You haven't bought a house, you've bought a hobby." And it took me a while to realize like just how right he was about that. And you'll probably get a glimpse into that, kind of the truth behind that, as I go throughout this story. One of the things I really liked about being a homeowner was just how empowered I felt to fix things. If there was something that wasn't quite right or needed to be made better, I had the power to fix it. I didn't have to call a landlord. I didn't have to wait for a repair person to come by. It's something that I could dive in and fix. If I didn't like the wall color, I just painted the walls. If I didn't like the carpet, and the carpet in this house was like covered in pet stains that were covered up with area rugs when we first saw the house. We ripped the carpet up. So I pulled up the carpet and underneath discovered these like beautiful hardwood floors that had just been covered up by carpet. And even though the hardwood floors needed to be refinished and they looked like really, really worn and like the finish was almost completely worn off, it still looked better than the really awful carpet did. And so like, even though all I did was take something away, I just removed the carpet that was there. What was left was better than how things were before. And then like, if I didn't like a light fixture in the kitchen, then ordered a new one and installed the replacement. But it was the ceiling fixture in the kitchen, that ceiling lighting fixture, that was kind of where things started to go wrong and things started to go sideways. As I took the old light off and was working with the wires that were in the wiring box, I noticed that like the insulation on the wires was really brittle. It didn't take much force from my fingers to just make the insulation fall off. And I had seen signs, after we moved in, that the previous owner had struggled with rodents. And so I was more than a little nervous that mice might crawl along a cable within a wall and cause the insulation to fall off and then have two wires touch and start a fire. Like that was something that I genuinely got stressed out about. And like, it would like legit keep me up some nights. Like I would like hear scurrying in the wall and think like, oh my gosh, like that whatever's in the wall is going to start a fire. So I turned this nervous energy and stress about what was going to happen into trying to come up with a plan for how to tackle solving this problem with the wiring being really old. And I decided to go ahead and establish like a really, really big goal of just rewiring the whole house. So replacing all of the electrical wire in the house. And then realizing that kind of presented an opportunity to fix some other things as I was going. I didn't really like the way the plaster walls had aged. There were lots of cracks in the walls from where the house had settled. There were tons of nail holes from where other things had been hung. There were layers upon layers of paint. The walls didn't look very nice, and I didn't like that aesthetic. So that would having to replace the electrical would create an opportunity to repair that. Most of the rooms were pretty drafty. They would get really cold in the winter, and they would get really hot in the summer. And started to suspect the insulation that was in the walls might be really poor, and that might be contributing to why the rooms were so drafty. So replacing the electrical wiring could create an opportunity to improve that as well. Most of the windows in the house didn't open and close very well. They leaked a lot of heat. They were just like single panels of glass. With layers upon layers of paint. Bugs could get in from the corners. Definitely not, the windows definitely weren't doing the job that you would expect a window to do. And then even though it wasn't necessarily related to the electrical work, figured why not refinish the floors as I'm going along as well? Like if we're going in and deciding to do a bunch of stuff, why not, tackle that on? But it did have some genuine constraints that I had to contend with. Sorry, my dog is trying to get my attention. Okay. One big constraint was my budget. I didn't have an unlimited budget. And I certainly didn't have I certainly felt like I didn't have the budget required to hire a contractor to get the work done. So it was really, really curious about how this was going to happen. Didn't have a lot of knowledge at the time. Didn't really know what the right tool for a particular job was, or even how to get the job done at all if I didn't have the right tool. Still needed to live in the house while it was being worked on. That was a pretty important constraint. The house's age presented, certainly presented a constraint. It was, like I said, it was built in the early 1920s. And there was a lot about the house's condition that I really didn't know. There were, I didn't know what, like if I tore down the plaster off the walls, I didn't know what I would find. I didn't know if there would be hidden challenges there. But I did have quite a few resources at my disposal. Probably most importantly is I had a really good friend. He was making improvements to his house as well at the time. So we shared a lot of tools, we shared a lot of labor, we shared a lot of experience. And there's a joke I've heard often about like what makes a good friend, and kind of the joke is that a friend will share a meal with you, a great friend will help you move. But I think there's another kind of addition that you can put onto that, and like a best friend will help you hold drywall up to the ceiling on a Saturday afternoon for hours on end. So that's certainly something that I discovered, is that having a good friend to help you with that was definitely a valuable asset. I had a bunch of do-it-yourself books that I went out and bought and just started reading, trying to draw inspiration for what could be done, what could I do myself, what might I need to hire people to do. There were a few videos that were online, but there wasn't really a lot of supply for really good how-to videos at the time. In the early 2000s, YouTube hadn't quite exploded the way it has today with this great wealth of videos for how to do just about everything. I also had a Lowe's and a Home Depot credit card for buying tools and supplies, and I definitely did take advantage of that. Oops. There we go. Okay, so the approach that I decided to take, because of the budget constraint, I decided to go ahead and take a do-it-yourself approach. I didn't have a lot of budget, so going through and doing things by myself, I thought would save me a fair bit of money. I thought it might also give me a little bit more control over how that money is being spent. I decided to go kind of one room at a time, and then within each room, take things on kind of one major task at a time. This had the advantage of allowing me to stretch out the budget, and I didn't need to make it a giant single investment. I could go buy the tools needed to tear down the drywall. I could go buy the tools to do the electrical work, and take things on that way. I also decided to kind of focus on two rooms that were adjacent to each other, and kind of do those staggered. So work on the drywall, work on pulling down the plaster in one room, and then work on pulling down the plaster in the other room, and kind of work on those two rooms. And then also I tried to avoid deadlines for this. I didn't want the added pressure of an artificial deadline. There wasn't really any great need, other than I wanted to eventually use the rooms for the purposes that identified. The larger of the two rooms upstairs, I wanted to use as an office and computer room for me and my partner. And I wanted to be able to put lots of computing equipment in that room. So that's something that I wanted. And then the other room was going to be used as a guest bedroom. So kind of deciding to take more of a the work will be done when we're satisfied, and decide to stop. So and I also realized that while taking this work on, there was a lot of opportunities that were presented to make things better than they were before. And so I decided to go ahead and lean into that. For the electrical work, I was able to improve the electrical system so that it met the needs of the room. So I wanted it to be a room with lots of computers that were on much of the time, with, speakers and monitors and uninterruptible power supplies and network switches and all sorts of stuff plugged in there. And I didn't want to have to worry about there not being enough power or overloading a circuit. So I decided to put in two 20-amp circuits in the room and then alternate every other outlet on each circuit, so that pretty much anywhere you were in the room, you could access either circuit. And then put in 3 power outlets on each wall. So way more than was actually needed, way more than was required by electrical code in the area that I lived in. But I wanted to make sure that there were plenty of outlets and that there was plenty of power. I wanted a ceiling fan. I like ceiling fans. The electrical box in the ceiling wasn't designed to support a ceiling fan, so I was going to put one in that did. And then, in addition to having a ceiling fan, I didn't want to have to mess with the controls for the ceiling fan by hand. I wanted those to be on a switch on the wall. So that's something that I was able to do during this as well. I also wanted to put in a lot of low voltage wiring. So I wanted to run cable for Ethernet. I wanted to run cable for putting in a whole house audio system with a volume control by the light switch at the door. I wanted a hardwire for video distribution. I thought it would be really, really neat to be able to have an HDMI plug on the wall that would show me what was playing on the television downstairs. So I could be in my office at my computer and use my DVR that's downstairs from my desk. So I thought that would be fun. It would be a great addition to the house. And then the room that we wanted to use for the guest bedroom, it didn't have a closet. There was a closet in the hallway, but there was no closet in that room. And what I've heard from folks, but I've never actually researched to see if it's true, is that back at the time the house was built, houses were taxed based on number of bedrooms, and what defined a bedroom was whether or not it had a closet. So this room didn't have a closet, and instead they put a closet like right outside in the hallway. So I wanted to take the door, the closet door in the hallway, and move that to inside the room. And yeah, so those were like improvements that I wanted to do while I was taking this on. So kind of like scoping all that out, it was kind of time to actually dive in and start doing some of the work. And I took a safety first approach. I tested for lead and asbestos. I expected to find one or the other. The tests for both came back negative, which I was a little surprised about, but I was actually really happy because it certainly simplified things. I bought a specialized respirator mask, similar to the one that's here in the picture, and got myself some good eye protection to help with all the dust that was going to get kicked up, especially when the plaster came off the walls. Next up was pulling down all the plaster, and that stuff was heavy. It was really heavy. It was way heavier than I was expecting, and it created a ginormous mess. Ended up taking tons of trips to the dump. I probably should have rented a dumpster. I think if I had to take on a similar effort in the future, I would rent a dumpster and park it in the driveway and deal with waste that way. But instead, I would like throw one or two trash bags in the trash bin, and then if the trash bin got filled up or got too heavy because the plaster was really heavy, and I didn't want the bin to get too heavy, then I would just take lots of trips to the dump. I did get quite the workout because of this, and I started to develop some upper arm muscle. This took like weeks to months, probably months, to get everything cleaned up, both the bulk of the plaster and then also the dust that got kicked up. The number of filters that I went through on the shop vac that I was using was pretty high. I went through a lot of filters just because the filter on the shop vac just kept getting clogged. And then even though I put up plastic I put plastic over the entry, and then for the room, and kept the door shut anytime anything was being pulled down, there was still dust everywhere throughout the house. So like you would kind of wipe down the kitchen at night, and there would be plaster dust on the cloth that was used to wipe down the kitchen counters. There was, plaster dust on everything all throughout the house. It just kind of got everywhere. Did run into some surprises when the plaster came down. I expected some. What I wasn't expecting was the complete absence of exterior insulation. So that was new. I suspected the insulation might not be awesome. I was surprised that it was completely absent. And then I noticed that I was pretty sure I wasn't tearing down the original plaster off the walls. So I think someone had pulled down the plaster walls and then redone it at some point before I bought the house, but probably, within the last, 50, 60 years of when I moved in, just based on how much paint was on the wall. And that's just based on the research I had done into different ways that plaster was installed throughout the years. The plaster that was on the walls was way more modern than I would have expected if it was original to the house. And that could be why the lead paint and asbestos test came back negative. Maybe a previous owner decided to get rid of those things. Next up was the wiring. So pulled out all of the old electrical in these two rooms, drilled holes for running cables in between the studs. I had to buy and replace several power drills as part of this effort. The wood that was in the wall was like really old and really strong, and it took a lot of effort, and kind of running the drill pretty much constantly for a few minutes just to put a hole in between each stud. This was really slow going work, and took advantage of the warranty for a few drills that way. Ran electrical cable up from the basement where the electrical panel was. Probably didn't take the most efficient route to the house to get that done, but found a way that worked. I ran the audio, video, and data cables to the room. I ran those from a coat closet that was in the living room. So I was going to convert that coat closet into kind of a network distribution closet for the house. And then installed the electrical outlets in the electrical boxes for the outlets in the room, and then the box in the ceiling for the ceiling fan, and the box in the ceiling in the closet for the light there. Wired everything up, and kind of like had it in there and ready to go, but no outlets or anything installed in the outlets just yet. Then the walls went up, so I decided to replace the plaster with drywall. I didn't, I know some people really like the look of plaster. I don't like, it's personal preference. My house, I get to decide what goes back on the walls. So just put up regular drywall. Before the drywall went up, though, put insulation in all the walls and the ceiling. So even put insulation in the interior walls to help with sound abatement in between rooms, and then put insulation in the exterior walls to help with temperature. Took care of the closet door swap in the guest bedroom. So where the closet door used to be, built a wall there, and where the wall for the closet was, tore down the stud that was there, and then framed out a closet door opening. Went ahead and installed replacement windows at this time. The windows took several weeks. I did like kind of one window at a time. And then, finish the drywall off and paint, and that took forever. I have a lot of respect for the folks that do that work. That is tough work. Then took the time to finish the floors and sand them again and sand them again and sand them again. And then baseboard and trim around the perimeter of the room, and then trim around the windows. And yeah, so that was pretty much everything that went into it. And then, started actually using the room. And there were some side effects of doing all this work. One is I amassed a bunch of new tools, including this shop vac that I used. I found this picture, and my cat at the time decided to have a lot of fun. I don't have any pictures of my corgi Ein during this construction project, but she lived in the house that this was taking place in. But I amassed a bunch of tools throughout this project. I gained a lot of knowledge. I had a huge feeling of accomplishment. And the computer room and the guest bedroom ended up being the quietest rooms in the house, which I thought was really interesting. That's something that really surprised me. You'd walk into that room and you just instantly noticed how much quieter it got. Almost, if anybody has like noise canceling headphones, and they put on noise canceling headphones, you just instantly notice how noisy the room you were in is. It was a similar experience walking into either of those rooms. I think, because of the thermal insulation that was installed also had, the additional side effect of sound abatement. So that was neat. It made those rooms, really pleasant to be in. But it was it was really noticeable when you would leave the room, just how much louder the house got. The house was on a pretty, not super busy, but a pretty busy street in the city. So there were definitely a lot of cars that went by. And it was, kind of front yard and then street. So there wasn't a lot of separation between the house and the street. And like I mentioned before, like with having appreciation for folks who do drywall, I have tons and tons and tons of appreciation for the people who do all sorts of crafts that go into housework, from the electrical to, I didn't do any plumbing in this project, but electrical work, drywall, the flooring, the trim work. Trim work is hard. Trim work is the amount of effort that goes into it relative to the visible return just seems off. There were many parts of the project where I would work for an hour and step back and be like, yeah, look at all that I got done. But when I was doing like trim or finish works, whether it was like, I think, sanding down the drywall or installing trim, I would work for an hour and step back and be like, what did I do? Why does that matter? And that was frustrating. But it's something I had to learn to kind of cope with. Forgot to title this slide. It was supposed to be consequences. So sorry about that. So some consequences of going through and doing this work is that I noticed it was never done. Throughout the entire time that I lived in this house, I never considered the work done. It seemed like a project that was just always in motion. I also noticed it was hard to keep the work contained to just those two rooms. So that the original plan was to kind of keep the work contained to just those two rooms. But some of the work spilled downstairs because I needed to install equipment into the closet downstairs when I ran wiring to it. So ended up creating some mess downstairs as well. When I did the work to move the door into the other room, to the closet door from the hallway to inside the room, that left this big like jagged plaster opening that I wasn't sure how to fix. I found the plaster really hard to work with. I found it really difficult to remove the existing plaster and get like a really good straight line. At the corners, they used this like really, really hard wire mesh. And so as you started to take the plaster off at the corner, it would rip it off at the ceiling. So it was really difficult to get a clean break. And so I started like, am I going to have to now, redo the whole house? Like, what's the way to fix that? So I was, that like gaping hole stood there for quite a while until that was figured out. And then similarly, at the doorway to each room, they had that spillover effect because my intent was to kind of maintain the plaster walls outside the room. But when the plaster around the door frame came down, that same like really strong wire mesh was used. And it was, at the time I didn't have the tools or the experience to kind of know how to cut through that. I think I've got some ideas for how I would do it now. But that was really, really difficult to contend with. One of the doors, one of the doorways to the room noticed was crooked. It wasn't square. So that needed to be fixed. So that was, kind of a surprise. So needed to install a new header, which is like the board that runs across the door frame. And that was interesting too, because the boards that were in the walls were precisely 2 inches by 4 inches. My apologies for not knowing the metric units for folks outside the US. But the wood was like, that precise dimension. But modern wood is a little bit smaller than that because of the process the wood goes through before it's put on the shelf. The wood that was built on the walls of this house like didn't go through that finishing process. So I ended up having to like take 2 smaller boards, like two 1-inch boards, and then put a thin piece of plywood between them to get like a true to get the actual 2-inch true 2-inch size. So that was surprising and took quite a bit of research to do. It cost way more than I ever intended it to cost. And I think part of that was like, there was always another tool that needed to be bought, or there was like always more supplies that needed to be done. I used to joke that, a home improvement project is kind of like playing golf. But what you use to keep score is how many trips to the hardware store you have to make. So it'd be like, this is a par two project. It's going to require 2 trips to the hardware store. But I feel like a lot of projects would be like 4, 5, 6 trips. And so like, I felt like my skill level was, determined by how efficient I was on that first trip to the store and anticipating everything that I was going to need, either in terms of supplies or in terms of tools. So that was, definitely a very challenging part of the project. And I imagine that's where, the craftspeople who do this work all day and actually know what they're doing. Whereas, I was reading books and making things up as I went. That's a lot of the benefit of their experience, is that they know what to get and they know what to expect and they know about how much they need because they've done it so many times before. So that's a lot of the value that they bring. So that was great. And then another thing that was really challenging is I needed to move before I had everything in a state where I wanted it to be. So there were things that needed to be patched up quickly, just to be able to move. And I didn't, looking back, I'm really kind of dissatisfied with how things turned out as a result. I wonder, wonder what it could have been like had I been able to stay in the house and live in it longer. But life happened, and I needed to move. I needed to move on. So only those 2 rooms were done. The goal was to rewire the house. Didn't come close. Rewired 2 rooms, but certainly didn't rewire the house. That wiring closet downstairs wasn't really ever finished. If you open that closet when I sold it, it was just bare studs with a networking cabinet with a network distribution panel in there, and wires coming in from the ceiling from the other room. Yeah, and so that having things wrapped up to the quality standards that I was like putting into it was having to very quickly adjust those quality standards, at the very end. What felt like the very last moment at kind of an arbitrary stop was really hard. Just having to wrap things up really quickly like that. It was probably the most challenging part of the whole project, was having to leave it before I wanted to be done. But looking back on this experience, even though it was challenging, even though it was hard, like I still love being a mender. This was a hard project that taught me a lot. The experience certainly made its marks on me. Some literally, like I have some scars on my hands, like actual honest scars. But I would do it all over again if I was given the chance. And I think I would probably end up doing a lot of things the same way. I truly believe that I made the best decisions that I could have at the time, with the resources that I had available, with the experience that I had. I truly did my best. I don't think I ever, approached the project with anything less than my absolute best. If I had to take on a similar project again, there's a lot that I would do different. But I think there's a lot that I would do the same. I really, especially the way I managed kind of time, and the way I kind of like had those expectations of trying not to rush and trying not to set arbitrary deadlines. That's certainly something I would keep the same. It's something that I, really enjoyed, and kind of like taking that slow and steady approach, and doing things slow over time. Although, like, I think if I had the funds and didn't need to live in the house, I would hire people to do it in a heartbeat. But I think having to live there was definitely a really big constraint. And so when I left, it wasn't a new house. It was still a very obviously an old house. It didn't look new on the outside. You couldn't really see on the outside that anything had changed on the inside. It still had a bunch of rough edges, but in areas that really mattered to me, like if I look at those two rooms, in my opinion, were better than new. I left those rooms way, way, way better than I found them. And I'm really proud of that. I'm really happy with the way that turned out. I think it's great. So that's what I got. Well, that turned out weird. Here's my contact information if anybody would like to get in touch and maybe ask some questions about what it's like to take on a project like this. And then I'm happy to answer any questions in the chat with the time we've got left. And for folks that don't have any questions, feel free to go ahead and take our break a little bit early. And then we will be back at the top of the hour with the pitch session. So. Do I still get to use the tools? Yes, I do still get to use the tools, although not as much, not in the same ways. A lot of them are still at my friend's house in Roanoke. Every now and then when I take a trip to Roanoke, Virginia, I'll come back with more tools that he ended up housing for me after I had to move. He was very kind when I was moving out. I was in this mindset that I just wanted to get rid of everything, including all the tools that I had, and just like give them all to Goodwill. And he insisted that I not give them the Goodwill, that I instead give them his basement, and he would warehouse them there. And he was really kind. He wrote my initials on everything that was mine. So he told me I could have it all back one day. Puppy still wants my attention. Come say hi. This is Puppy, not a corgi, but she's still pretty awesome. Yeah. So I do still get to use the tools, and very grateful to my friend for not letting me just toss them all. Oh, Edwin, nice to hear that you also have an old house which needs a lot of renovation. We can share stories. So if you want to avoid any avoid any pitfalls or try to benefit from experience, I'm happy to help. Cass, I'm reading your comment now. Yeah, so the comment about truly believing that I made the best decisions that I could have, that is a lot of like what I say on the software projects. I truly believe that whenever anybody shows up to do a task, they are committing to do their best work. I don't believe that anybody shows up and does less than their best. It might be less than their best ever, right? But it's their best that day, right? So it given the constraints that they have on them on that day at that time, their best is what they're putting out. And so yeah, that's certainly something that I think of when I look at code that was left behind from somebody else. I look at it like this was this person's best on that day. Tool accumulation debt. Why is it hard to part with acquired things? Yeah, that's fair. Like I certainly have way more drywall tools than I think I'll ever need. And I should probably get rid of some of them. I have, because I have enough tools for two people to help me, because I had friends come over at one point in time and help me out. So I bought extra supplies. I certainly don't need those extra supplies anymore, but I've held on to them. And then, some of them haven't necessarily aged well. Like they're kind of rusty and, might benefit, getting rid of them and then waiting to see if I ever do need to do that work again, then I could acquire new tools. There's certainly other tools that I don't need. There's tools that I'm glad I didn't buy and instead rented, like the sander for the floor. It would have been ridiculously expensive to actually buy that. Instead, I rented it. So I only had it for as long as I needed it. I think one of the things I wish I had rented was there's a device that will take a piece of drywall and will hold it up to the ceiling for you. I wish I had bought one of those. Instead what I bought was a little platform to stand on. And me and my friend, stood there, one of us with their arms on the ceiling while the other one drilled screws into the ceiling as fast as possible, because those 4 foot by 8 foot sections of drywall are very heavy, and holding one up to the ceiling by yourself is quite a challenge. Yeah, Old Southwest. Yeah, so I was on Brandon Avenue, right across from Brandon Avenue. I was on Brandon Avenue, right across from, there's a park. I forget the name of the park, but yeah, that's where my house was. So awesome to have somebody here who grew up in Roanoke, Virginia. But yeah, so I think we'll wrap up there. Thanks everyone for coming and attending, and take some time to take a break in between the vents, stretch, get something to eat, hydrate, all those things, and we'll see you with the next thing.